Hello and welcome to C++ command line tutorials. Today we'll be looking at creating the Hello World program, the starter program for C++ command line programming. Okay, so let's get started. We'll start by opening Terminal like we have previously, and the first video shows you how to get that set up if you are not familiar. So we're going to go ahead and type ls to see what files and folders we currently have. And from all this, we're going to be working in the tutorials folder. So let's go ahead and switch over to that. So simply by typing cd tutorials. And if we list the files, we'll see that there's nothing currently in here because we haven't created any. So let's get started. Let's type vim and then helloworld.cpp to create a C++ file. Okay, so now there's some technicalities we have to go over in C++ files. The first line that you're almost always going to include is going to be #include iostream. And this is just basically C++ wrote some code for us already to do things like print to the screen and other stuff, so that way we don't have to write it. And include is the way to get those different files from C++. So don't worry too much about it, but just know that most of your files will start with #include iostream. They will also have what's called using namespace std, which stands for the standard namespace. And this again is something not to worry too much about, but it's just something that will be in most of your C++ code, as most files that you write in C++ will be in the standard namespace, as it's called. Now we're going to create the main function, which is needed in all files that you want to run for C++. And it's int main and then int argc char asterisk argv with square brackets and then a closing brace, opening closing for main, and then you'll also see the opening and closing curly brackets. And this is in order to just like show what contains in main. So anything in between those curly brackets will be what is inside of main. So the next step is to actually write the code for Hello World. So we start with c.out, which stands for C output. And this is what you use to print to the screen in C.out, or in C. So then you do two left triangle brackets, and then you type inside of parentheses whatever you want to print to the screen. In this case, Hello World. You'll do a couple more of the triangle brackets to the left, and then endline, or endl, which stands for endline. So this is actually all that is needed to print Hello World to the screen. And if we escape and then go ahead and save this by hitting :WQ, it'll take us back to the home screen with the file that we just created. So if we hit ls, we can see the file we created. And now to compile in C++, you use what's called G++, which is the G++ compiler, and then just type the name of the C++ file you would like to compile. When you do this, it'll take a second, and then you'll see that nothing appears to have happened. It just goes to the next line. But if you hit ls, you see that there actually is an extra file called a.out. So the compiler creates this extra file, which we can run by simply doing /a.out. And that will print Hello World to the screen. Okay, so that's everything needed for Hello World, but I'm going to show a couple extra tips and tricks. So if we go back into our Hello World file, and then we get rid of this endl at the end line, I'll show you what the difference is. Because it might sound kind of weird that you need to add this in, but let's see what it looks like if we don't add this in. And you'll also see why we usually end most print statements with an end line. So let's go ahead and compile and run this again. So again, just G++ Hello World CPP. And then in order to run a.out, we just do /a.out. And you'll see that there's no new line now. So tutorials in like the next line, but right up against Hello World that we wanted to print out. So let's go ahead and go back into our code. I'll go ahead and end this end line back in. And then you can see again how it's supposed to look with that new line. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and show another trick that you can do. So if we go back into our file and we get rid of this to make it a compiler error, so let's go ahead and let's remove the closing quotation marks from hello world. So all words need to be encapsulated in both left and right quotation marks. So if we get rid of those, let's see what happens. So we go to compile again with G++, and we get this long list of errors. And as you can see, the compiler is pretty good at catching which line was the problem. The arrow points to the beginning where it should end somewhere, but it doesn't. So the compiler is pretty good and will catch lots of errors you make when typing your C++ code. So that was how you get compiler errors, and let's go ahead and fix that, rerun it, and make sure everything looks good again. a.out, great. And so we're back to how we were before. So the next thing let's go into is let's reopen our C++ file. And let's change this by adding a ton of exclamation marks to the end of hello world so that we're super excited about the hello world. Let's go ahead and save and quit. Let's go ahead and run our file again with a.out. And you notice nothing changed in the code. And you may wonder why this is. And that's because a.out only changes once we compile. So now if we go back and actually recompile our code, and now run a.out, you'll see that it's updated to what we want. So if you ever changed a bunch of lines in your code, and then you run the executable file, a.out, again, and nothing's changed, most likely it's something as simple as you forgot to recompile. Okay, so I hope you found this video helpful, and go ahead and like if so, and subscribe for more tutorials.